History remembers empires for their monuments, their wars, and their revolutions. But beneath the marble statues and royal decrees lies a darker truth. For centuries, civilizations developed execution methods so brutal that later generations attempted to reform, abolish, and in some cases quietly erase them from collective memory. These punishments were not random acts of cruelty. They were legal. They were public. They were meant to send a message. Tonight, we investigate 10 execution methods civilization tried to leave behind, and what they reveal about the evolution of justice itself. In Imperial China, from roughly the 10th century until its abolition in 1905, a punishment known as lingqi, often translated as death by 1,000 cuts, was reserved for crimes considered especially grave, including treason and parricide. Contrary to popular exaggeration, historical records suggest it was carefully regulated, and in some cases victims were given opiates beforehand. However, photographic evidence from the early 20th century shocked the Western world and intensified pressure for reform. In 1905, during late Qing legal modernization efforts, lingqi was formally abolished, marking a turning point in China's transition toward a modern legal system. In England, from the 13th century until 1870, high treason carried a punishment known as drawing and quartering. The condemned was dragged to the execution site, hanged, disemboweled while still alive, beheaded, and then cut into 4 parts. The remains were displayed publicly as a warning against betrayal of the crown. This punishment reinforced royal authority during unstable political periods, particularly between the 14th and 17th centuries. By the 19th century, however, Enlightenment ideals and shifting views on human dignity led Parliament to formally abolish it under the Forfeiture Act of 1870. Across parts of the Holy Roman Empire from the medieval period into the early 19th century, the breaking wheel was used for severe crimes such as murder and robbery. The executioner would systematically shatter the condemned person's bones with an iron bar before weaving the body through the spokes of a large wheel, which was then raised on display. The spectacle was meant to deter others. By the 1800s, penal reforms sweeping through Europe ended the practice, as prolonged public torture was increasingly seen as incompatible with modern justice. One of the most debated execution methods in history comes from ancient Persia during the Achaemenid Empire in the 5th century BCE. Known as scaphism, it was described by the Greek historian Plutarch centuries later. According to his account, the condemned was trapped between 2 boats, force-fed milk and honey, and left exposed to insects and the elements. However, many historians question whether scaphism was ever truly practiced or whether it was Greek propaganda designed to portray Persia as barbaric. In this case, the execution method itself remains a historical mystery shaped by political narrative. Impalement, practiced in several regions, including parts of the Ottoman Empire and Eastern Europe, became particularly infamous in the 15th century under Vlad III of Wallachia, often called Vlad the Impaler. Victims were placed on sharpened stakes and left to die slowly, sometimes over days. Contemporary accounts described forests of impaled bodies, though historians believe numbers were exaggerated for psychological warfare. As centralized governments modernized their legal systems in later centuries, impalement disappeared from official codes. During the reign of King Henry VIII in England, Parliament passed a statute in 1531 making boiling alive a legal punishment for poisoners. The condemned was lowered into a cauldron of water or oil until death. The law was short-lived and repealed in 1547 under Edward VI, reflecting the volatile and often harsh nature of Tudor justice. Over time, such punishments were replaced by methods considered less torturous. Another English practice, known as peine forte et dure, or pressing to death, was used between the 13th century and 1772 when defendants refused to enter a plea in court. Heavy stones were placed on the accused's chest, increasing in weight until they either agreed to plead or died. The most famous recorded case occurred in 1692 during the Salem witch trials in colonial Massachusetts, when Giles Corey was pressed to death. The practice was abolished in England in 1772 as legal systems evolved to prevent such coercion. In parts of the Indian subcontinent and Southeast Asia, execution by elephant was documented from ancient times through the 18th century. Under certain rulers, including emperors of the Mughal Empire, elephants were trained to crush or dismember condemned prisoners. The spectacle demonstrated royal power and control over both man and beast. With the expansion of European colonial rule and legal reform in the 18th and 19th centuries, the practice gradually ended. The brazen bull, allegedly used in ancient Greece during the 6th century BCE, was said to be a hollow bronze statue shaped like a bull. Victims were locked inside while fire was lit beneath, and the structure was designed so screams would sound like the bellowing of an animal. Like scaphism, historians debate whether this device was ever truly used or whether it served as symbolic propaganda against tyrannical rulers. Its story survives as part legend, part warning about absolute power. Finally, during the French Revolution in 1792, the guillotine was introduced in France as a supposedly humane and equal method of execution. Proposed as a reform to eliminate prolonged suffering and class-based disparities in punishment, it became the defining symbol of the Reign of Terror between 1793 and 1794. The guillotine remained in use in France until 1977, and the death penalty was abolished entirely in 1981. What began as a symbol of equality ultimately became a reminder of the moral complexities of state-sanctioned death. These execution methods were products of their time, shaped by fear, authority, religion, and political instability. They reveal how societies once believed justice required spectacle and suffering. Yet over centuries, influenced by philosophical movements, legal reform, and human rights advocacy, civilizations redefined punishment. What was once lawful became unthinkable. What was once public became shameful. History does not erase these practices. It records them, not to glorify cruelty, but to remind us how definitions of justice evolve, and how easily power can blur the line between order and brutality. This is Dew of Dread, where history's darkest chapters are not sensationalized, but investigated.